Robert Kiyosaki, the real estate mogul and well-known author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, recently shared something nobody believed would ever happen. And that's the fact that now Warren Buffett is backing crypto like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and also metals like gold and silver. Now, it's important to note that Robert Kiyosaki over the last couple of years has been pretty consistent in his message that we are going to experience a crash, a stock market crash that is bigger than anything else in history, that is going to wipe out the financial security of millions of investors, especially the baby boomers. And this will not just be any recession, it's going to turn into a depression, which is why it's so important to own harder assets like crypto and even gold and silver. And maybe he's onto something and the entire market is prepping for a major crash, not only in the US market, but in global markets where the tides really shift and money flows away from fiat currencies and into digital currencies alongside gold, as gold has been rallying really hard off its prior highs of $2,000 since March of 2024 for an 88% gain in one of the largest runs in history. Now, what makes this even more unique of a market environment is that gold has typically been a hedge against inflation and uncertainty in TradFi markets like the S&P 500. Here I have this blue line which indicates the S&P 500 and the price action which indicates gold. As you can see, they typically deviate away from each other. When the stock market is up, people sell their gold in order to buy stocks or otherwise more risky assets that actually produce capital in environments where people have capital to spend. We call this discretionary spending. Then in environments where there's true uncertainty like that in 2020, gold will drop a little bit just because there's always panic selling. But then generally speaking, gold recovers hard and people continue to eat up gold in case markets don't do too well. And you see this consistent flow where they ebb and flow away from each other. Stock market rallies, gold dumps. But then over the last few years, going back to November of 2023, you can see that there's virtually been no deviation. Both gold is trending up and the stock market is trending up, even when one remains a bit more volatile, which is creating uncertainty at levels markets have never seen. How long will this rally last? How long until the crypto markets top if they're really considered risk on asset classes? And more importantly, should you be buying or selling your XRP? Well, Warren Buffett, the greatest investor of all time on paper, currently believes that the majority of the market is overvalued, and Berkshire Hathaway is sitting on their largest cash reserve in history to the tune of about $344 billion as of current date. That's some serious dry powder waiting on the sidelines in order to buy virtually any major market crash in some of the best stocks, companies, and potentially gold and silver and crypto. So in this video, I'll be covering the statement from Robert Kiyosaki, whether or not Warren Buffett's truly going to be buying cryptos, which will inevitably pump the price of XRP. And of course, I'll be covering the latest price action on crypto like Bitcoin and XRP. So let's dive into the video, my friend. And as always, if you're feeling blessed and bullish, comment 777. And if you're going to be the wealthiest person in your family tree, smash the subscribe button. Hello and welcome back to the Bull Runners channel. If you're new here, my name is Paul. You can find me on Twitter or X at PauliDefi, PAULIEDEFI. We're living in one of the most fascinating times in history. In virtually all scenarios and circumstances, over the last few years, both the stock market and gold have been trending up. I'm going to go ahead and show you this chart just a little bit more in depth. We're going to look at correlation, and then we're going to dive into these statements by Robert Kiyosaki to see if we can't get a better picture into what's really going on and whether or not major players like Warren Buffett are finally going to enter the crypto space, which again, any endorsement by Warren Buffett will likely lead thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of major investors with some serious capital sitting on the sideline to invest in cryptos and in gold and silver. So let's dive into these charts to see what we can find out about the correlation between gold and the stock market and whether or not this is a leading indicator to tell us what's happening next in the entire market. That said, you can see that gold and the stock market are relatively correlated. There are periods where they usually trade in the same direction as each other, as in the bottom of October of 2022 till present day, but every now and then you'll get a deviation away from, where one trades up and the other trades down. But in times of severe volatility or uncertainty like that in 2020, you'll notice that the stock market dumped right here, as did gold. However, there was a sharp recovery in gold and far less volatility. It took quite some time for the stock market to recover back to its prior high, about 175 days, whereas gold only took about 30 days. So yes, gold is better to hold in the case of a stock market crash, but generally speaking, when you zoom out, Warren Buffett truly has been right about which is a better asset to hold. Right behind me, this chart goes all the way back to the 40s. And since that point in time, if you would have held the stock market or the S&P 500, you'd be up 56,000% relative to gold's 11,000%. So the stock market, innovation, companies, the US economy has been a far better hold than something stagnant like gold. Gold typically acts as a hedge against uncertainty, very similar to that of Bitcoin. Except Bitcoin is programmable and we know exactly how much there is relative to that of gold. We don't know how much more is in the ground or how much is actually in government reserves around the world, how easily it can be confiscated relative to something like Bitcoin, which you can keep your private keys directly in your brain and send billions of it in terms of the dollar amount around the world in a matter of minutes. You simply cannot do that with physical gold. So the better technology will tend to win, and already it's outperformed both gold and the stock market over the last 13 to 14 years, whereas these guys took about 80 plus years to do this. But that's the price you pay for holding assets like this, because they are typically less volatile than something like Bitcoin or crypto, which is a far newer market. However, the rewards are far greater in crypto, which is why we work so hard to cover cryptos on this channel. Now, what I truly find fascinating, we're looking at a weekly time frame, is the fact that going back to 2007, gold has now outperformed the stock market to the tune of 1,200% relative to the S&P 500's 360% gain. Now, by any standard, these are great gains when you look back over the last 18 years. The stock market is still giving you a return of like 20% year over year, which is absolutely insane. But what I find even more interesting is the fact that the stock market used to deviate away from gold. You can see that the stock market in 07 started dumping into the bottom of 09, whereas gold was rallying really hard to its high in 2011. Then at that point in time, gold put in a huge handle for a period of about 9 years, where it dumped quite a while, hung out in a range, built a base and a support, and started rallying back up to its prior high in 2020, right after the COVID crash and correction. While the stock market just continued to rally in that time, money was moving away from gold and into one of the most resilient and strong stock markets in history. Then, sometime in March of 2020, you can see that they've both been highly correlated. Gold started putting in its handle right here from 2020 to 2024. While the stock market continued to rally, gold really built a base and rallied hard for some major gains where both are highly correlated, which is really weird and has caught many investors off guard. So now that I've created a foundation for understanding the correlation between gold and the stock market, your question is probably, what happens next? And what exactly did Robert Kiyosaki say? Well, On September 30th, he stated that he wants to vomit and that he's nauseous because he just listened to Warren Buffett tout the virtues of gold and silver after he had ridiculed gold and silver for years. And many people who followed Buffett know that he does not like gold as an investment because it's not active working capital. At the end of the day, you're sitting on something that is stagnant. It doesn't do anything to add value to people's lives like that of companies where you can truly get alpha. And I would argue the same is true for cryptos. The majority of cryptos aren't great. And some people might argue, well, Bitcoin is also like gold. What's the value of that? Well, it's consistently outperformed everything else. And because it was so young and nascent, it had a lot of room to grow. Eventually, it'll look more like gold in the fact that the majority of the market is already in it, and that's when the opportunity will no longer be alive there. But currently, there's still an opportunity. Now, this means the stock and bond market are about to crash. Depression ahead. Now, one thing to note about Robert Kiyosaki is that he's pretty consistently been wrong. In other words, the real value that you can get from this video is that even people that have been very successful in their own right, like Robert Kiyosaki, selling millions upon millions of copies of all of his books and sitting on over $1 billion in real estate assets, at the end of the day, this is something that he consistently gets wrong. It sounds like he knows his markets, but even then, it's hard to trust something that Robert Kiyosaki says. And I'm not saying that a broken clock isn't right twice a day. Because eventually, if someone keeps yelling out, stock market crash, eventually it will occur. And then they can say, see, I told you so, I was right. But how long? At what point do you say, I need to put my capital to work for me and not lose this time and opportunity cost? Since he tweeted this in April of 2025, the S&P 500 is up 32% when Robert Kiyosaki tweeted it, saying that the largest stock market crash in history is right around the corner. In other words, market timing does not work, and I agree with Peter. Then in his tweet, he goes on further to state that Buffett did endorse gold and silver, which means stocks and bonds are going to crash, and that it might be time to listen to Buffett and buy some gold, silver, Bitcoin, and Ethereum. And in this case, if Bitcoin and Ethereum are being bought up in mass, XRP will be as well. However, many went on to state that Buffett has not endorsed gold or silver and that his long-standing position as an unproductive asset has not changed. In other words, this is truly BS, and I went on to verify and double verify. So Kiyosaki's literally and blatantly spreading misinformation. I went ahead and asked ChatGPT, you can do it yourself. I went ahead and asked Grok. I Googled it. I could not find a single statement from any one of his press releases, any quarterly reports, yearly reports, from their shareholder meetings, where Warren Buffett states that he is now bullish on gold. His stance remains unchanged, and this is an endorsement of gold is a complete fabrication because it lacks quotes or evidence from Buffett. And the only thing that Buffett ever did do with gold is buy Barrick Gold to the tune of a $500 million stake in Q2 of 2020, which is a gold company. And this was due to market volatility because of COVID-19. However, in Q4, they did end up selling all of their stake in that company. And since that point in time, have nothing to do with gold. One thing remains for sure. It's the fact that both Kiyosaki and Warren Buffett believe that something big is going to happen in the crypto and stock market, considering Kiyosaki's consistently loading up on assets like Bitcoin, gold, silver, and Warren Buffett is consistently sitting on the biggest cash pile in history and typically adding to it, which means he sees companies as overvalued right now, and usually he waits to deploy that capital in the case of a complete and total market crash. But it's important to take everything with a grain of salt because that market crash might not come until 2026, 2027, potentially even 2028. Nobody actually knows. And that conventional thinking around the fact that major influencers and investors like Robert Kiyosaki are going to get it right will leave you out of the market and on the sidelines for far too long while you miss out on gains. And I'm not saying that gains are the end all be all, but at the end of the day, the only thing we have have is time. And if you're always losing time by sitting on the sidelines, never creating wealth for yourself or earning interest on your current capital, then what's the point of being in markets at all, right? Not only has Robert Kiyosaki consistently been wrong, but even a guy who predicted the stock market crash of 2008 and profited handsomely, Michael Burry, was completely wrong on all of his shorts in 2023, and even his prediction that it would happen sometime in the middle of 2024, and actually had to close out all of his short orders, and who knows what he's doing. But this is a guy that everyone said is going to get it right and has now been wrong multiple times, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars in leverage. So what's really going to happen next? Well, I fall on the side of Tom Lee, at least over the next 3 to 4 months. Let's have a listen.
The second is monetary liquidity sensitivity, global central banks easing. That's Bitcoin and Ethereum. And seasonally strong. I think they could make a monster move in the next 3 months, like huge.
So now what I'm going to do is cover the price action on Bitcoin and then move into XRP. If Bitcoin continues to trend and rally, this is going to create a very positive environment for other cryptos to move to new highs like XRP. Currently, XRP is lagging Bitcoin, which means Bitcoin is leading. The majority of money is flowing into Bitcoin, and that usually happens. Then what happens is you see a rotation into a minor alt season. We haven't really seen a true alt season yet. Most altcoins have been lagging Bitcoin the entire cycle, which means money's no longer falling for all of the same old tricks that crypto used to put up. Nobody cares to buy second best. They want the best of the best. And so the best cryptos have risen to the top, and that includes Bitcoin. As you can see here, Bitcoin is now back above its range resistance of $120,000 and just hit its prior all-time high of $124,000 on the day. We're seeing growing or expanding volume on the buy side. This is a very good and healthy sign for Bitcoin. Even if we cool back off to $119,000, not a big deal, and I totally expect this trend to continue to the upside, looking very good, which leads me to XRP. As you can see, XRP is nowhere near its prior all-time high of $3.66. We still have another 21+% to go, but that can happen honestly in a few days, sometimes a week max. So volume has consistently been declining on XRP since that breakout to highs, and then we've been in a descending wedge or triangle with our resistance right here at this trend line, where you can see we touch the majority of the tops of those wicks, and we just saw a bit of sell pressure on the day with one doji right on the prior day. But this is very healthy price action considering we are now back above that $3 support or resistance. What used to be a support then becomes a resistance right through this range and then becomes a support again. So a break above this descending wedge, a break above the $3.12 range, which is our next resistance, should take us right up to those prior range highs of 335, then 360. If Bitcoin continues to rally, this is going to look really good for something like XRP. But right now, like I've said over and over and over again on this channel, all dips are for buying at the 275 range, at the 285 range. Anything above 275 was good to buy considering that was our support, and we even saw some pretty nasty breakdowns right below that support in order to wick out, or better yet, liquidate people who were on leverage and hit as many stops as possible before the next leg up. Now that said, that is it for the video, folks. I hope you learned something in this video, and at the end of the day, you can never trust anyone just because they're a big name, an influencer. I always recommend you look into the data for yourself and double verify. Just because a big account shares it does not make it true. Even more so for someone who seems to be a very solid investor and who's made probably $100+ million in their lifetime, like Robert Kiyosaki, might be embellishing or flat out lying. I don't know where he got that information. Maybe he heard it from a friend and immediately posted it, but it simply isn't true. Nothing Warren Buffett has ever said about gold is extremely positive, and one of his own managers at his company went went and bought that gold barracks company, only to sell it off 2 quarters later. Now that said, if you enjoyed the video and you actually want to take advantage of all of the gains through October, November, December, which are going to be huge months for crypto, get involved with altcoinpro.com. You should see a link somewhere in the description below, and check this out. Our very own Solj, otherwise known as Luke, shared that inside of our community, our picks returned 288% in September, and we have the results to double verify this through a consistently updated spreadsheet. Everyone in our community is winning if they're taking advantage of just our altcoin picks alone. And yes, we have about 1,000 members paying us to be here. We've had them paying for the last year straight because they're probably making more money than they're spending to be here, which means you can take advantage of any one of these things. Whether it's any of our live calls, I host a technical analysis call on Tuesdays. You can ask any questions you have and I'll answer them live. Whether you want to put your crypto to work in some of these DeFi yield farms right now, there's one on Camino that our experts show you how to take advantage of to take about 20% on stable coins. Now, these don't last forever. They're not meant to. They're meant to incentivize you to add liquidity to these pools. So even if it takes you 15 minutes once per week, do about an hour every month. Think about that. 12 to 15 hours per year. You can earn at least 15 to 30, sometimes 50+% on these DeFi farms. And guess what? That's more than enough to not only pay for your membership, but for some of you, that's enough to actually go pay for a new car. So it really comes down to whether or not you're willing to take action. I highly recommend you take action with the end of the year coming in, with Bitcoin looking extremely strong. Take advantage of the tools, training, and resources we offer in altcoinpro.com. You literally have nothing to lose, everything to gain, 14 days of your money back. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video, my friend. Goodbye.